Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. Today, we're going to be tackling something that I think is super relevant to, well, probably everyone listening, but especially as we get a little bit older. We're going to be looking at how technology and learning can really work well together and what we can do to make sure that computer-based learning is actually effective, no matter your age. I mean, think about it. The ability to learn new things and gain new skills, that's something that doesn't just disappear. It stays with us, right?
Absolutely.
And technology, if we use it right, can be such a valuable tool to help us do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for this deep dive, you actually found this great research article, Cognitive Aging and Computer-Based Instructional Design.
Yeah, it's a really cool article.
It is. And it takes a look at, how we can optimize this kind of learning, technology-based learning as we age.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're going to be unpacking for you today. And what's really interesting about it is it's not about saying, oh, older adults need a whole new set of learning rules. It's actually about taking the core principles of good instructional design, the things we already know work, and adapting them to address the specific ways our brains change over time.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's super important. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so I guess to start, we should probably talk a little bit about what is happening when we talk about cognitive aging, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just like, you forget where you put your keys, right?
Right.
It's more fundamental than that. Um, there's a general shift in how efficiently your brain processes information.
Hmm.
And it happens at this neural level. And so you can almost think of it as like, the signals in your brain, they're not traveling quite as fast as they used to.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that researchers are finding this cognitive slowing. So that slowing down, it's actually related to changes in our senses like vision, hearing, touch, which kind of suggests that, there might be a shared biological basis, for both of these changes.
Oh, interesting. So both the sensory stuff and the cognitive stuff, the brain stuff is all they're kind of on the same like wavelength in a way.
Yeah. And they seem to decline,
Hmm.
in parallel.
Okay. So if you're trying to learn something new, like what does that actually mean for you at a, practical level?
Yeah. Well, the research really highlights two major areas where you might notice a change.
Okay.
The first one is a slowing down of what's called your general cognitive speed.
General cognitive speed.
Yeah, yeah. And this isn't just about how fast you can react in a video game or something like that. It's about how quickly all of your mental processes work.
Right.
So how quickly you can take in information, how quickly you can process it, how quickly you can make decisions. It affects all of that. And there have been a bunch of studies showing that, in tasks where speed is important, older adults actually have reaction times that are about 1.4 to 2 times slower than younger adults.
Wow.
It's quite a difference.
Yeah. So how does that actually impact someone's ability to learn something new?
So it can impact learning in a couple of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Researchers have proposed this idea of a limited time mechanism.
Okay.
And basically what that means is that if your initial mental processes, so like, paying attention, perceiving information,
Yeah.
if those take longer, then that leaves less time available for those later stages of understanding and integrating information.
I see.
So you can almost imagine, like you're trying to put together some furniture, right? You've got the instructions in front of you, and if you're still trying to figure out step 1 while someone is explaining steps 2, 3, and 4 to you, well, you're going to miss something.
Yeah, you're going to get lost along the way.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the second, mechanism that they propose is the simultaneity mechanism.
Okay.
And that suggests that actually the results of those earlier mental processes like that perception and paying attention, that stuff might fade away before those later processes are finished.
Interesting.
So an example of that would be, you're reading a really long, really complex sentence. By the time you get to the end of the sentence, you might not remember the beginning of the sentence.
Oh, yeah.
Those initial parts have kind of faded, and then you lose that overall meaning.
Okay, so basically your brain can't hold on to all of it at the same time.
Exactly. And this idea of, cognitive speed slowing down,
Mhm.
the article actually suggests that this might be a central mechanism in cognitive aging overall.
Mhm.
Like a lot of the changes we see might be driven by this slowing down of our processing speed.
Okay, so that's number one, like the speed aspect of it. What's the second key area?
Yeah, the second one is a change in something called cognitive control.
Okay. Cognitive control.
Yeah. And this is a whole set of mental abilities
Hmm.
that help you manipulate information in your working memory and also plan your actions.
Okay.
And these changes are often linked to the frontal lobe, which is, the front part of your brain.
Yeah.
And a lot of research in this area focuses on this concept of working memory.
Yeah.
And, the article focuses particularly on this idea of the central executive within working memory.
Okay. So can you explain what the central executive is? I mean, is that kind of like, is that like the boss of working memory? Like it's kind of controlling everything?
Exactly. It's like the control center of your working memory. It's responsible for making sure everything runs smoothly. It directs your attention. It filters out irrelevant information. It helps you switch between tasks, all of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And one of the most studied aspects of this central executive is its ability to block out distractions. So, that's called inhibition of irrelevant information.
Inhibition of irrelevant information.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful.
It is.
But it was actually first proposed by these researchers, Hasher and Zaks, back in like the 80s. And so the idea is that as we get older, your working memory might become a little bit more cluttered.
Okay.
Because you might be less efficient at filtering out the irrelevant information. So it's not necessarily that you can hold less information. It's that you're more easily distracted by things that don't really matter, which then affects your ability to remember what is important.
So it's like the signal to noise ratio is a little bit wonky there.
Exactly.
No.
But, cognitive control is not just about blocking distractions. It's also about things like switching between tasks, updating information in your mind, searching for specific details, integrating different pieces of information together, and then also coordinating your thoughts and actions.
Okay. That's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot going on under this umbrella of cognitive control. But the article, they specifically highlight coordination, and they introduce this idea of coordinative complexity versus sequential complexity.
Okay, so coordinative versus sequential. I need a little bit of help understanding that.
Sure. So, imagine you're learning a new recipe.
Okay. I like recipes.
So if the recipe has a lot of separate steps that you do one after the other, like first you chop the vegetables, then you saute them, then you add some liquid, that's more like sequential complexity.
Okay.
Each step is pretty independent of the other steps.
Right.
Now, imagine a recipe where you have to simultaneously monitor a sauce on the stove while you're also preparing a garnish and remembering to preheat the oven.
Okay, yeah.
That's coordinative complexity.
Yeah.
You're managing multiple things at the same time, and they're all kind of interconnected.
Right. So it's not just about the number of steps in the recipe. It's about how much they depend on each other and how much multitasking you need to do.
Exactly. And research by this guy Mayer and colleagues, they've actually shown that this age-related slowing that we were talking about, it's much more noticeable when a task has this coordinative complexity. And this actually connects to this concept called the complexity effect, or what Perfect and Mailer, these are other researchers, they called it the dull hypothesis.
The dull hypothesis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, the idea is that as a task gets more complex, the difference in performance between younger and older adults gets bigger.
Okay.
Especially if that complexity involves this coordinating multiple things at once.
Gotcha.
So the article's argument is that a key aim of instructional design should be to kind of try and reject this dull hypothesis. Find ways to make sure that older adults can still perform well on these complex tasks.
Okay, yeah. It makes sense, right? You don't want things to get duller as we get older.
Right, exactly.
So we've talked about these changes, that are part of cognitive aging. But the article also really emphasizes that our brains can still adapt, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The brain is incredibly plastic. Even as we age, it's constantly adapting and compensating. But the article also acknowledges that it can be more challenging for older adults to pick up entirely new cognitive skills, things that are completely foreign to them.
Right.
And this is especially true when technology is involved.
Right.
So, this is where the focus on instructional design becomes super important for you.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
how can we present this new information in a way that's actually going to help older adults learn it effectively?
Right. Right. And I love how the article makes this point about shifting our thinking away from just trying to simplify computers for older adults to use, and instead focusing on how can we use computers as tools to implement good instructional design.
Yeah.
How can we actually use this technology to our advantage?
Right. And that's a really important point because, oftentimes we think, older adults need special software or special interfaces or something that's super simplified.
Right. Big buttons, everything's really loud.
Exactly. But the authors of the article, they actually quote this other paper by Fisk et al. Yeah. And they say that, Good design for older adults is usually good design for people of all ages.
Hmm.
And then they propose flipping that around.
Okay.
And they say, good design for people of all ages is especially good design for older adults.
Hmm.
So in other words, if we just focus on making things clear and easy to use and understand for everyone, then it's going to be especially helpful for older adults.
Okay. So we need to kind of take these design principles, these instructional design principles that we already know work, and make sure we're applying them in a way that's going to be beneficial for older adults.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what are some of the theories, like what are some of the frameworks that are particularly helpful for us to keep in mind here?
So the article highlights two major ones. The first one is John Sweller's cognitive load theory, or CLT.
Okay, CLT.
Yeah. And this theory really focuses on the idea that working memory has a limited capacity.
Okay.
We can only hold and process so much information at once.
Right. And we were just talking about how that capacity might be even more limited in some ways as we age.
Exactly. Exactly. And so the main goal of CLT is to design instruction in a way that minimizes something called extraneous cognitive load.
Extraneous cognitive load.
Yeah. So that's basically the mental effort that doesn't directly contribute to learning.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's like it's the stuff that's making you work harder, but it's not actually helping you understand the material.
Got it. So like, if I'm trying to, let's say I'm trying to learn a new software program and the interface is super cluttered and there's all these buttons and menus and things and I'm just trying to figure out where everything is, that's extraneous cognitive load.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not
Mhm.
helping you actually understand how to use the software.
Right.
And CLT also talks about germane cognitive load.
Okay.
So this is the effort that you're putting into actually understanding the material, into building those new schemas. And so the idea is to try and optimize that germane load to really help people learn effectively.
Okay, so minimize the extraneous load, the stuff that's just getting in the way, and really optimize that germane load, the stuff that's actually helping you learn.
Exactly. Exactly. And this becomes particularly important, when you have less prior knowledge about a topic,
Mhm.
when the task is complex, or when your working memory capacity is reduced, which, as we were saying, can happen with age.
Right.
So it's really about making the most of your working memory resources.
Okay. So how do we actually put CLT into practice? Like, how do we actually use these ideas to design better learning experiences?
So there are a bunch of practical principles that have come out of CLT.
Okay.
One of them is goal specificity.
Goal specificity.
Yeah. And this is interesting because, you would think that having a very specific goal, knowing exactly what you're supposed to be learning, that would be helpful.
Right. It seems like that would be intuitive.
Exactly. But research suggests that sometimes practice problems with less specific goals or even unspecified goals can actually be more effective.
Really?
Yeah. And the reasoning behind this is that it reduces the load on your working memory. You're not trying to hold all the details of this very specific goal in your mind. And it also encourages you to explore the problem more broadly, to try different things, to experiment. And that kind of exploration can actually lead to deeper understanding.
So it's like by having a less specific goal, you're kind of forced to think more creatively and explore the problem space more fully.
Exactly. Exactly. And they even mentioned this study about learning to navigate a maze. And
Mhm.
older adults actually showed smaller performance differences compared to younger adults when they were learning without a specific goal in mind.
Wow. So it's like sometimes a little bit of ambiguity can be helpful, especially for older learners.
Yeah, it can be. It kind of forces you to think a little bit more outside the box.
Okay, that's really interesting. So that's goal specificity. What else is there?
Another powerful principle is the use of worked examples.
Okay, worked examples. I feel like I've heard of this.
Yeah, you probably see them in textbooks or online tutorials. So instead of just giving you a problem to solve on your own, a worked example shows you the problem and the complete steps to solve it.
Right, right. So you're not just thrown into the deep end. You're shown how to do it first.
Exactly. And CLT suggests that this is beneficial because it reduces what's called backward processing.
Backward processing.
Yeah, so backward processing is when you're trying to solve a problem and you're constantly having to go back and forth between the problem and the solution steps, trying to figure out what you need to do next.
Okay,
And that can be very taxing on your working memory.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Worked examples, they help you focus on forward processing, which means you're just focusing on understanding the steps, and that can be a lot more efficient, especially for older learners who might have a bit more difficulty with that backward processing. And the article mentions a study where worked examples were a much more efficient way for older adults to learn, even when the material was presented in a multimedia format.
Okay. So worked examples can be a really powerful tool, especially when we're dealing with complex information.
Absolutely.
And that kind of leads us to the multimedia principle, right?
Yeah. So the multimedia principle, it's briefly discussed under CLT, but it's actually a core part of the second theory that we're going to talk about,
Okay.
which is Richard Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning, or CTML.
CTML.
Yeah. So the multimedia principle basically says that people learn better from words and pictures than from words alone.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like it's easier to understand something if you can see it as well as hear about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is that it prevents unnecessary visual searching. You know, if you just have text, you might have to spend a lot of time searching for the information you need. But if you have a picture or a diagram, it's much easier to find what you're looking for.
Right. It's like having a visual map of the information.
Exactly. And it also utilizes both your visual and auditory working memory.
Yeah.
So remember we were talking about those separate channels for processing information.
Right.
This is called the modality effect.
Modality effect.
Yeah. Basically, if you're using both channels, you're not overloading either one.
Okay, so you're kind of spreading out the cognitive load a little bit.
Exactly. And then the third reason is that it allows you to encode information in both verbal and nonverbal forms. So you're kind of creating a richer representation of the information in your mind.
Okay, so that makes sense. It's like it's giving your brain more ways to hook on to the information.
Right, exactly.
So CTML is all about using multimedia effectively to improve learning, right?
Exactly. And while it does build on the multimedia principle, it also focuses on these attentional aspects of learning. Like, how do we get people to pay attention to the right things, to process information in a meaningful way? But at its core, it shares the same basic understanding of cognitive architecture as CLT, right?
Okay.
So it recognizes that we have these dual channels, that our capacity is limited, that we need to actively process information.
Right. So it's kind of building on those same foundational principles.
Exactly. And CTML has led to a lot of different design principles.
Okay.
And many of them are particularly relevant for older learners.
Okay, so what are some of the CTML-based effects that we might actually see in online learning? Like, what are some of the things that designers are actually doing based on this theory?
So one important one is the segmentation effect.
Okay, segmentation.
Yeah, so this is basically just about breaking down instruction into smaller chunks and allowing the learner to control the pace.
Okay.
So instead of having one long continuous presentation, you have these shorter segments that people can go through at their own speed.
Gotcha. So it's like hitting the pause button whenever you need to.
Exactly. And that could be super helpful for older learners because, as we were saying, their processing speed might be a little bit slower. So this allows them to really take their time and digest each piece of information before moving on.
Right. It's like instead of drinking from a fire hose, you're getting a nice, steady stream of information.
Exactly. Another important effect is the pre-training effect.
Pre-training.
Yeah. And this is the idea that it's helpful to present the basic building blocks of a concept, the key terms, the definitions, before you actually explain how they all fit together.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're teaching somebody about the Pythagorean theorem, you might want to start by explaining what the sides of a right-angled triangle are before you actually present the theorem itself.
Okay, so it's like laying the groundwork, making sure everybody's on the same page before you start building the house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's about, preventing that cognitive overload.
Right.
Making sure that people have a chance to understand the basics before you hit them with the complex stuff.
Okay. What else?
Then there's the coherence effect.
Okay. Coherence.
Yeah. And this is all about removing any extraneous information, anything that's interesting but not actually essential to learning. So this could be things like background music, decorative images, anything that's kind of distracting.
Okay.
And this is especially important for older learners because, as we were talking about, they might have a bit more difficulty filtering out those distractions.
Right. So basically, keep it clean, keep it focused.
Exactly.
So that's coherence.
Yeah. The signaling effect is another important one, and this involves highlighting the key parts of the visual information that you're talking about in the audio narration.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're showing a diagram and you're talking about a specific part of the diagram, you might want to highlight that part so that people can easily see what you're referring to.
Right. So it's kind of like guiding the learner's attention, making sure they're focused on the right thing.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
The redundancy effect is an interesting one.
Okay. Redundancy.
Yeah. So this suggests that when you're using visuals, it's generally better to just use audio narration rather than displaying the same text on the screen as well.
Okay.
Because having both at the same time can actually overload the visual channel and make it harder to learn.
So it's kind of like you're either listening or you're reading, but you can't really do both effectively at the same time.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And then we have the spatial contiguity effect.
Okay. Spatial contiguity.
Yeah. So this is all about placing text labels right next to the corresponding parts of a diagram.
Okay.
So, if you have a diagram of the human heart and you're labeling the different parts, you want to make sure that those labels are right next to the parts they're referring to.
Right. So you don't have to like draw lines or arrows or anything. It's just all right there, super clear.
Exactly, exactly. It minimizes the amount of visual searching that people have to do.
Okay. And what was the last one?
The last one is the temporal contiguity effect.
Temporal contiguity.
Yeah. And this basically says that it's better to present the audio narration and the corresponding visuals at the same time rather than one after the other.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that the words and the pictures are synchronized.
Right.
Because that helps people make those connections in their minds more easily.
Okay. So we have CLT and we have CTML and we have all these different principles. Now, how do we actually connect all of this back to cognitive aging, to the things we were talking about at the beginning?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is where the article provides this really helpful, what they call a mapping.
Okay, a map.
Yeah, they basically connect those specific age-related cognitive changes. So, things like reduced working memory capacity, slower processing speed, difficulty inhibiting irrelevant information, challenges with coordinating information.
Right.
They connect those to specific multimedia strategies that can be used to compensate for those changes.
Okay, so they're saying, hey, if you're having trouble with this, try using this design principle.
Exactly, exactly. And they draw on both CLT and CPML for those strategies.
Okay, I like that. It's like a cheat sheet for designing for older learners.
Exactly. So, for example, let's take reduced processing capacity of working memory.
Right.
That's one of the big ones that we were talking about.
Right.
So the article suggests a bunch of different instructional strategies that can help with that.
Okay.
One is using both audio and visual presentation.
Okay.
So bimodal presentation. Because, that spreads the load across different processing channels.
Right.
And it also helps with encoding, right? Because you're getting the information in two different formats.
Right. You're seeing it and you're hearing it.
Exactly. Worked examples are also really helpful because they reduce the need to generate solutions from scratch, which, frees up working memory. And even using those practice problems with less specific goals that we were talking about, those can also be helpful because they reduce the load on working memory initially.
Okay.
And then also presenting information in a step-by-step manner, starting with the basic parts before showing the whole picture. So that pre-training effect.
Right.
And then also removing any extraneous information, so that coherence effect and redundancy effect.
Okay.
All of those things can help to ease the burden on working memory.
Okay, so it's like instead of giving someone a giant puzzle at once, you're giving them the pieces one at a time and helping them put them together.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
And they provide similar connections for all four of those categories of cognitive decline.
Okay.
So for slower processing speed, for example, using both audio and visuals together in a really well-timed way, removing that extraneous information, and then allowing self-pacing.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
People can control the speed of the presentation. Those are all key strategies.
Okay. So give me an example of how this mapping actually works, like with a concrete example.
Sure. So the article uses this example of the water jug problem.
Okay. The water jug problem.
Yeah, so this is a classic puzzle that's used in cognitive research. And basically you have these jugs of different sizes, and you have to figure out how to pour water between them to end up with a specific amount in one of the jugs.
Okay. I feel like I've vaguely remember this from like a psych class or something.
Yeah, it's a pretty common one. So the article actually shows a visual layout of the water jugs that was used in one of the studies.
Okay.
And they also show an example of a step-by-step worked solution to the problem.
Okay.
So imagine you're trying to learn how to solve this water jug problem online.
Right.
So how could these design principles that we've been talking about be applied to make it easier for older learners to understand?
Okay, yeah.
So, for example, to reduce that load on working memory, instead of just showing the initial jugs and the target amount and then saying, okay, figure it out, the program could provide a worked example, right?
Okay.
So it could show each pour and explain why that step is being taken. And then to further support working memory, that explanation could be provided as audio narration, along with the visual demonstration.
Okay, so you're both seeing it and hearing it.
Exactly. And then to accommodate potentially slower processing speed, the learner should be able to control how quickly each step of the worked example is presented.
Okay, so that self-pacing idea again.
Exactly. Exactly. And then if we want to help with that, inhibiting irrelevant information, making sure people are focusing on the right things. When the narration mentions a specific jug, that jug could be highlighted on the screen.
Okay.
So it's very clear what they're talking about. And then to help with coordinating the information, the animation of the water being poured should happen at the same time as the audio explanation of that action.
Okay.
So they're synchronized.
Right, right.
And then any text labels for the jugs should be placed right next to the jugs themselves, so there's no searching involved.
Okay. Yeah, that's really clear, and it makes sense, right? Like those little tweaks can actually make a big difference in how easy it is for someone to understand the material.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that the article really explores is whether older learners benefit more from these instructional methods than younger learners.
Yeah, and that's a really important question.
It is.
And the research findings on that are actually kind of mixed.
Okay.
So some studies have shown that these well-designed instructional strategies, they benefit everyone, host